This is the first event of the Burlington Discover Jazz Festival 2014. It begins. My name is Steve McQueen. I'm the artistic director here at the Flynn. I'm so glad you could make it here to this artist interview with Regina Carter. By now, those of you that have come to these events must know Bob Blumenthal. I think this is his 42nd year? 14th. It's his 14th year. It's his 14th year as critic in residence here at the Jazz Festival. He's a fixture, and we're so delighted to have him. A fantastic writer, fantastic presence here at all the festivals. And Regina Carter is just an absolutely magnificent musician. You're going to get to hear her story. It's quite incredible. I spent 2.5 hours with her in a traffic jam today on 89 on the way back from the point. A cheese truck blew up. You can't make this stuff up. That's fantastic. But anyway, to kick off the festival, please welcome once again Bob Blumenthal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is on, but hello to all my old friends, some of whom I've seen and the rest of whom I assume when the lights come down I'll recognize. As I told Steve, the cheese truck was still smoldering at 3 o'clock when I was driving here. So that was an interesting way to enter Burlington. It was also a little overcast, but it's beautiful now. So I think that's a great sign. Another great sign is we have so many fascinating artists that are going to be performing over the next 10 days, and many of whom are going to take some time to talk with us here also. And to start us off and start the festival off, one of the best people I could think of, one of the most unique and original voices in jazz, and particularly in the last few years, someone who's gone in some fascinating and unexpected directions, and I want to talk a little bit about that as well as some other things in her life and career. So please welcome Regina Carter. I told Regina, instead of starting with, why do you play the violin and all that kind of stuff, starting at the cradle, we're going to go, maybe we are going to go a bit back, but Regina's on the cover of 7 Days, and I was one of the people that the author spoke to when he wrote the piece, and one quote he didn't include, I said, I've really been impressed by the last 2 albums Regina's made. He said, people would say they're concept albums, but then they're concept albums, and then there's a Regina Carter concept album. For example, I could make a tribute to Frank Sinatra, and I know all the songs, and you know all the songs, and then it's just, can I put my own slant on them? And this, I think, is the way a lot of concept albums are made. But Regina, with Reverse Thread and the new one, which I'm blanking on the title, Southern Comfort. Yeah. These are of a different order of challenge for you, I suspect, challenge for listeners, and it really is a project. People talk about my next project, but these really seem like from conceptual to study to transformation. It's really a whole other order of concept, if you will. So I wondered if we could talk about that for a bit, and how, well, let's talk about Southern Comfort, let's start with the idea, how the idea comes and how the idea gets tested to the point where you say, I'm going to go a step farther with this.
Well, this whole thing this was not supposed to be the record that I was doing. I don't know what I was actually going to be doing. So every record, I think I'm going to do one thing. People always say to me, what's your next project going to be? And I used to say it was going to be this. And then it would be the furthest thing away from that. So now I say I don't know, because I think it finds me. With Reverse Thread, even before that, I've been always curious about my family, not only my family, but from where I come. And I just thought it's more than just my family of my parents and my 2 brothers and grandparents. And I think growing up in the 60s in Detroit and watching the History Channel and seeing all these cultures of people that had these rites of passages and the clothing, that the costumes that they wore, and all these traditions. I wanted to be a part of something where I had traditions like that. So there's always that curiosity. And I knew more about my mother's side of the family. I knew that my grandmother, her mother graduated from Morris Brown in 1915 with a degree in pedagogy for piano. So music was always important in our house, music and education. But I knew more. I knew my grandmother. I knew my grandparents on my mother's side, but I only knew my grandmother on my father's side. No one ever talked about my grandfather, so I didn't really know anything about him. So I joined Ancestry.com during before I did Reverse Thread, and my results were 73% West African, 13% Finnish, and the rest some other cast of like European countries, just a wide net. So then I was even more curious and started doing my family tree and started making connections with other family members or people that I don't know them, but were related, and I could see it through the trees. And spending so much time, because I was so curious, I was becoming more and more involved in this project. And then I started thinking, I knew my grandfather was born in 1893. Was there music that was happening then? What was happening? I just got more and more curious. And when I started listening to some of these field recordings, after a while I thought, man, this would be a great project to try and take these field recordings and put this out so people could hear what was going on, so what would be my family journey. So at the same time I'm finding out about my family, I'm finding the music and presenting some of this stuff, because you're not going to hear it on the radio stations. You have to really go and look for it.
So how do you find it? How did you find it?
Some of it on the American Folk Life Association online. I went online. I just started Googling music from the late 1800s, and some of the recordings that I found were pretty, there was some stuff that shocked me, I was like, wow, but it's all of this is part of our history, so there it is, bam. But some of it from American Folk Life Association, some of it, Jason Moran turned me on to the John Work III Foundation. I didn't know who he was. He was collecting music, more African-American music. He was around before Lomax, but introduced Lomax to a lot of the people, African-Americans in the South, so they would feel comfortable with him coming into their homes. And then also, the Library of Congress just has a wealth of information. There's reading materials, interviews, recordings, all kinds of things there. So I just really got immersed into this and couldn't stop. I had, someone had to say, okay, this is your deadline now for this record, because I'd still be sitting there just, I've never been that curious, even in school, so it kind of shocks me that I'm this curious now about history. But part of it is it has something to do with me, but I think a bigger part of it is when I can connect history to music, to art, when it all comes together like that, then it makes more sense than just this thing that's on the outside that you have to learn.
Well, one thing that struck me, and I suspect a lot of other people, we tend to think of music from a century ago. If you think of African American music, think of blues, early jazz, and then a lot of what you hear on the album, you say, oh, but isn't that white folk music, And did you learn much about what kind of interaction was going on among the communities, and how much of the music was really shared and common?
Well, when you think about Appalachia, there you had the African Americans, the Native Americans, the Scots, the Irish, all these people living amongst each other. So that's where the specific sound that we call Americana, roots music, that's that sound made up of all of those cultures coming together. So I wasn't necessarily looking for African American music. It was just what was happening there. And plus, looking at my background too, and they said, 13% Finnish, so who knows. But one interesting story, because some of the music is also from some neighboring southern states. It's not all out of Alabama. It's just is a tune by Amadi Adwan, who's the father of accordion, of like the Louisiana sound. And his story, he loved to play music, and he loved to play for everyone. And there were certain parts of town that he wasn't allowed to go and play, or he wasn't even allowed to be in. And he would push that limit all the time, and just because he wanted to play music. And some of the white musicians that he played with, they would go and ask permission, okay, can he come and play for this? And if people said yes, he'd go and play. But there was a party he was hired to play of a white family, and the men would get drunk always and forget that they hired him or whatever, and just became a game where they'd chase him afterwards, and he'd always get away. But he'd come back, and later they have him back to play. And one time, a woman of the house, a white woman, dabbed his head with a handkerchief, and they just completely flipped, and they chased him, and they caught him. And unfortunately, they ran over him with their truck, and it was a pretty ugly ending. But when you watch the video, it's online, Amadi Adwan, you just see how many musicians he influenced, black, white, and other, and how many just admired and really respected him. And just, listening to some of the stuff I found, I found some recordings that were just very racist, it was just, that's what it was back then. And instead of just, it was shocking or sad, instead of just say, okay, let me bury that. I think it's all part of our history, and just to really try and see the, if you can say, see the beauty. There's some music, amazing music that came out of that, and really just celebrate that part of it, and to say, okay, it happened, let's keep moving. But there's this music, and let's not bury that music because of what it was attached to.
Well, I mean, for me, I think music and sound has its own meaning that transcends the literal meaning of whatever lyrics might be attached.
Right,
I
yeah.
think there's that too. A lot of this music had violins or fiddles, if you will. You're someone who, you've had classical training, you've played jazz on the violin. Did you find a need to adjust your technique to play this music at all?
Yeah, definitely. And without going and studying with some fiddle players, it was all by trying to just really listen to how they were approaching their instruments, and really listening to the singers, because all of these songs, basically the field recordings are just a single voice singing these melodies, but trying to capture that sound, and knowing that, okay, it's a looser, more relaxed sound, and not overplaying, really letting these raw, beautiful melodies kind of come through. And although we've arranged them and we're improvising over these tunes, but it's like, don't put a bebop line over this, it just doesn't work. Let it be what it is.
You also, and again, this occurred with Reverse Thread too, you kind of reform your band to bring new instruments and new sounds in that were appropriate to the music. And maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect you had not played with accordion that much previously. So are there adjustments that have to be made as there are new blends that are created in the ensemble?
Well, I started with accordion on I'll Be Seeing You, A Sentimental Journey. So it's from that record. That was 2006 or 7. Okay. So it's been a while. But no, I didn't really have to make an adjustment. I've always loved accordion. I grew up watching Lawrence Welk and just... yeah.
Tell us that's not the next project, please.
I'll have bubbles and everything. But yeah, it's just such an amazing instrument. All the sounds that it can get, and I'm still discovering. Sometimes we'll do something, and I'll turn and say, "What was that?" or "Who was that?" And it sounds like it's coming from across the room, and it's coming from his accordion. So it's a lot of fun. All the different timbres and sounds he gets with it. And just all the instruments that are related, that, the bandoneon and the buttonless and buttons. And I went to the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix. We were on vacation last year, and we had a chance to perform there recently. And they have the museum divided by country, and you could just see all these instruments and how they've evolved or devolved, or and just seeing like bagpipes made out of a goat's kidney or something. And then you see video footage, and you can hear some examples. So it's pretty amazing.
So Lawrence Welk, one of his most famous comments was he once said he was going to play Duke Ellington's theme song, "Take a Train."
Yeah.
So now you found the music, and I assume you found a lot of music, a lot more than gets on the record. How does it get to the step where you've put it into arrangements that work with your concept and your group?
Well, when I'm listening to these field recordings, sometimes a person's name would pop. I'd say, oh man, Xavier would make a killing arrangement. I hear him on this. So I write down little notes and I'll say, oh, this sounds like Lawrence, or this sounds like, or this is a band. Or I start playing around with them myself, these ideas. And then with the band, I send them all the field recordings because it's important that they hear that and start to soak that in first, so they have that. And with the arrangers, I would send each person, each arranger, maybe 3 or 4 tunes and tell them. And all of these arrangers, they know me personally, musically, they know the band, because it's important that they know how we play, so the arrangement is written for us and not just a stock arrangement. And I'd say if none of these tunes connects, if you don't connect with them, let me know, I'll send you some other tunes, because I need you to have a connection with it as well. And so they would send it in and send examples and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And I'd say, okay, yeah, maybe take it down a notch, or, you know, yeah, that's whatever, you know. And then we get a hold of it, and then we had a couple of months where we were rehearsing pretty much 5 days a week, and we would record the rehearsals. And then I would listen to them and make changes and send those recordings out. And as we were playing, make big changes in some of the arrangements, and then after that, just keep playing and playing, and then they just organically start to change on their own. And even now, the record just came out, in March, and we're in May, and I see how much a lot of them have already settled and changed. And it's like when you cook, you know, always tastes better about 3 days later.
But it's also the chance to go out and perform it and let it evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Because I assume that you made the record and then toured. You didn't necessarily, or did you play the music live on tour before you recorded?
No, this time we recorded. Then I wanted to take it out on the road. That's what I did with Reverse Thread. Actually, we played the music about a year or more before we recorded it. But with this one, it didn't work out that way. So. Yeah, it was great to be able to have almost a month to just play and rehearse. But yeah, so we recorded it and then went out.
You talk about the music evolving, and given that improvisation is so central to what you do, it's by definition going to evolve. But whenever you get into traditional music, I suppose there's some traditionalists around who say, oh, you got to play it exactly this way or that way. I mean, do you feel there's a point beyond which you're going to lose the essence if you let it evolve too far, or is this not an issue?
I don't think about that. I don't think it will, because we've all heard the field recordings, and we're always aware and paying respect to that. So it's not like it's going to go so far out. It's just, and because there were no harmonies with any of these tunes, there was a certain freedom there for us to, but still, we still were paying our respect to them. We're not going so far away from the melody that you don't recognize it.
Okay. How is it received? Because I know when first time I heard you do Reverse Thread, I think it was before it was recorded, and it wasn't what I was expecting. And I'm sure that as this music is presented, you get some of that reaction as well. Are you finding people shocked? Are they with you?
Most people are they love it, when they hear it. And when they first hear what it is, sometimes some people said, when I did the APAP convention this year, some of the presenters from Europe were like, it's too Americana, or it's too this, or it's too that. And then I play these places, and the audiences would love the record. So it's like, well, if we don't put it in a box, and if we don't try and second guess what the audience is going to like, and just play the music and let them experience it, that's the best thing. And people have had a really positive response. And I think what helps too with this record, because no one's really, there's some certain tunes people might recognize, like Cornbread Crumbled in Gravy, or a couple others, but there's a sense that you know some of these. You feel like you know them. And also playing the field recordings before some of the songs, so people hear the actual field recording, and then they hear what we've done with it. I think that helps too, so it includes everyone.
Okay. Do you experience jazz withdrawal, and that you're not playing, tunes with complicated chord changes and the kind of thing you would normally be doing? And do you have to go back and practice the stuff you used to play?
Yeah, once in a while. I mean, we still throw in. Sometimes I'll do a standard, or a jazz tune.
Yeah.
Too, like "I Can't Believe You're in Love with Me" or "Lady Be Good" or the tune Al wrote, "New from New Orleans." So I'll put something like that in the and I mix it up. It's not always just everything from the record, because I know that some people that are coming want the other stuff, and that's fine.
It takes a lot of confidence to throw yourself into a project like this. And you've been recording under your own name for, what, close to 20 years now, maybe 20 years. Did you always have that confidence, or can you mark off a point where you said, yeah, I've got an idea. I'm not going to let some producer tell me what the record's supposed to be like?
I've always been very, I don't know what the word, I'm very headstrong, even as a child. One thing I had to learn, which I'm grateful for, being with record companies and you have producers or A&R people, is that I had to learn that I am a product. What I do is a product, and if they want to sell record, we have to sell this product. How are we going to sell it? So how are they going to get what they need, but how am I going to get what I need? So there was a delicate balance that I had to really learn. And then once I received the MacArthur, and I could just kind of on my own say, nope, this is what I'm doing, period. Here's the record. Take it as it is or leave it. That gave me, I think, that point right there. And I with Reverse Thread, I wasn't sure. Maybe one CD would sell, and it didn't matter to me then. I just needed to be able to, feel like I had artistic control, and I could make something that I felt like was for art's sake, and put it out. And if it didn't sell, so what then? It was okay. Then I could go back and do something else. But I needed to get that out of my system. And in doing that and seeing that it was received so well, I just thought, okay, who knows better? This is what I want to do. And I think if I'm really honest with what I'm doing, then, I'm never going to sell millions of records. But I think people that have listened to me for these years trust that I'm not going to just throw out some crap. I'm really invested in the projects that I put out.
You mentioned the MacArthur, and it brought up a question in my mind, because I'm always curious about how each artist takes the liberty that it presents, because it does allow you to, not worry about paying a certain number of bills. So how did it change your approach?
Well, if people say, oh, that MacArthur came at a great time, I don't think there's not a great time to get it, But I had, when did I get that? I think it was like 2006. And my mother had passed away the year before, and I'd spent time taking care of her through her transition. And then I went through a lawsuit because I canceled a gig because she was going to die. And I didn't really have time to mourn her. I remember literally coming back from the cemetery, and my attorney came to the funeral. He was like, I got to send this letter off now because they said you had enough time to mourn, blah, blah, blah. You've got to. So it was just a really horrible year. I couldn't think of anything I couldn't do, and then I became so angry and bitter. I just said, you know what, I'm not playing music anymore. This just, forget it. I'm done. And John Clayton, God bless him, great bassist, composer, arranger, said, if you stop playing, you let them win. And that sort of said, okay, I can't let them win. So getting that money, and I had another record, my last record for Verve to record, so I decided to do a healing record so I could heal and doing music that my mother grew up with, music from the 20s and 30s growing up in Detroit. So after that, the MacArthur allowed me to take a year and just not have to work, not have to play, and to really just cleanse myself and get all of that negative energy outside, and then really think about what is it that you want to do with your life. What do you want to do musically? What do you want to say? What do you want? How do you want people to perceive you? It was just a big turning point for me. So it gave me time to really be able to think about that and and clear out some stuff and then come back to the music.
Okay. I want to ask you something about your instrument. When a lot of instrumentalists, you know that people will come up to them afterwards with their saxophone and say, what reed do you use? What mouthpiece? If they're guitar players, what attachments, this and that. I don't, maybe violinists have these conversations, but you seem particularly well placed, having played Paganini's violin, to talk about why you like your violin, okay? And just give us some insight into the world of violins and what works for you and some of the violins you've played.
Well, it's really funny that you say that because we were on tour for a month, and the guitar player and the bass player and the tour managers and guitar players, so they'd all be talking about, oh man, when we get here, there's this guitar shop, we really have to go, and I'm gonna blah, blah, blah. And then when we go here, and I thought, man, violin players, we don't do that. We don't have that. And I guess because, you could spend, some hundreds of thousands of dollars for violin, so you're not gonna just jump out and go check out violins and stuff, unless you have an electric violin, and then you're going to look at the equipment that goes with it. So the violin I have now I bought when I moved to New York while I was playing with the string trio of New York. Okay. And I went to a shop, and I had been searching around and listening and playing, and there happened to be a gentleman, a violinist in the shop at the time, and he played the violin for me, so I could hear it across the room what it sounded like. And it had more of an alto voice, if you will, so a little bit on the darker side, and it fit my pocketbook. So that helped. And then the bow changes the sound too, so whatever type of bow you have will drastically change the sound of the violin. So I had a couple of bows, one bow made, and I just had to find the right bow for that instrument. And I have another one at home that I grew up with, but I only use that when I have to put this one in the shop. But I don't have a lot of violins, I just have one.
You didn't take your MacArthur money and buy that expensive violin?
No.
So when you got to play the sacred violin, what did you find that you could and couldn't do on it that you were used to doing?
Well, that violin, the canon, the Il Canone, is so much bigger than mine that the string length is a lot longer. So when I go to shift up to, say, third position, the note wouldn't be there. And so it was like being in a dark room, being in a bedroom, and someone coming in and changing all your furniture around and then telling you, don't open your eyes, just get to the bathroom without tripping over something. So, and it had a lot of wolf tones, and a wolf tone is when you go to play the note and it doesn't speak. It's like in the morning when you go to speak and you have to clear your throat, so that kind of thing. And just every instrument is different when they're handmade. Every string instrument is different. And I didn't have that much time. With a new instrument, it could take you 6 months to a year to really get used to it and it get used to you. And I had about, 2 days for a couple of hours each day. I think 2 hours, 3 hours in the morning and 3 in the afternoon with an armed guard sitting in the room with me. So it just didn't feel really relaxing. Just someone with a gun sitting there. Play a wrong note, see what happens.
You mentioned the String Trio of New York, which I heard you perform with. It has to be 20 years ago, I would think. And before that, where I first heard you was in a group called Straight Ahead.
Right.
And thinking about that, it made me wonder if you had any thoughts about Straight Ahead was 5 female musicians all from Detroit,
right.
From the Detroit area, and the band started recording in the late '80s, 1990 thereabouts, and at the time. A female drummer and a female bass player and a female violin player in jazz. This was sort of everybody who took notice. And now here we are down the road, and we all like to think that things have improved and gotten better, but I still see the women in jazz issue of magazines and things. What do you think? How have things changed, and how haven't they that need to change?
It's an interesting subject. Because there was this whole, there were these women protesting, I guess, the Jazz at Lincoln Center ban because Winton doesn't hire that many women. I spent 3 months on the road with him. You can have it.
Are we playing Blood on the Fields? Was that it?
You know, that many men and one woman. And the thing is I think of, okay, yeah, it should be open so that more women are in, anyone, if they're qualified, I don't know, if you do blindfold auditions or however they do it. But in reality, when you're a woman and you're in a band with that many men, and no, this is no disrespect to men, but, you know, I see it in my own band. The guys turn into 6-year-olds after a certain point, and they start talking about stuff that I don't want to hear. So unless I'm going to keep my earplugs in all the time, so what then? I'm going to tell you, stop talking about that. You're being disrespectful. It just is. So I don't know. You know, that's one. I don't care if he hires one. I mean, I think if he should, and it's still not. I don't know. It's just really interesting. It's still a very male-dominated world, but it's interesting too to work with some of the big bands. And I go in high schools and see the few women that are in there, young women, and they're usually really shy. And there's a certain kind of attitude and swagger that when you watch jazz musicians, when young boys watch these. You could see it sometimes. You go to some places and you see the young boys and they'll have that walk or that cockiness or the way they dress or the way they talk. It's like a thing. And women, we don't really have that many role models, so you feel kind of awkward, like you don't want to act like that, like, or you feel like you have to act like this, or how do you act? Or so it's a thing of being able to be, and it's that whole thing of people saying, well, it's being able to be as a woman, not be afraid to just jump out there or be aggressive and not be worried about someone calling you bossy or the other B word, which, you know, so many times they do. And even like leading a band a lot of times, you know, I'll hear guys say, oh, she's this, or just like, but it's her band. She's the boss. You know, you got to do what she says, you know. So it's this, we don't have a lot of role models of how to be and how to, you know, survive. But I think if you want to do it, you'd really just, it's really about having that, I think because it is male dominated. I don't see a lot of those bigger bands necessarily hiring more women.
Yeah. And in fact, it's still, Mimi Jones, a bass player, just started a label for female musicians, basically. And I think her band may include all women. I'm not sure, but it's still an issue that people are grappling with, obviously.
Right, yeah.
So I wanted to see if there were any questions from the house. The first one's always the hardest to extract. There we go.
I'm just wondering, the violin isn't really a common jazz instrument, and I was just wondering how you came to play the violin in jazz.
Well, I was turned on to jazz by way of 3 violinists: Jean-Luc Ponty, Noel Pointer, and Stefan Grappelli. That was my first introduction to jazz, period. And so I was like, if that's what jazz is, this is what I want to do. But in going back and realizing that before the avant-garde period, I mean, there were a few there, but you had, in bebop, you had folks like Stuff Smith, Ray Nance, Eddie South, then you had Billy Bang, Johnny Frigo, Joe Kennedy Jr., and so many more. So there wasn't, maybe they just, it wasn't as, there weren't as many jazz violinists as there were, say, saxophones or guitars. So a lot of people don't realize that from the beginning it was actually a part of the jazz scene. A lot of those cats doubled either on trumpet and violin, clarinet and violin, or something else. But I think if I had not heard those 3 violins, if someone hadn't just brought me those records, I wouldn't have known, because I grew up playing European classical music and listening to those records, of course hearing Motown and the Beatles in my house, but I would have been trying to get a gig in someone's orchestra. I had no clue.
Yes.
I forgot.
What's that?
I forgot.
You forgot? Okay, well,
He just got a violin.
how old are you?
7.
7?
I got it when I was 6, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, are you taking lessons yet?
Uh-uh.
Not yet. When are you going to start?
I don't know.
Well, I hope you start soon. Okay?
He's just been learning some very basic things.
Okay, good, good.
Anybody else?
Regina, you mentioned Amadei Ardoin, the black accordion player from South Louisiana. Did you get a chance to hear some of the white fiddlers, Sadie Corville and D.L. Menard?
Yeah.
Not D.L. Menard,
I know, some of
Dennis
the,
McGee.
the accordion player sent me a bunch of stuff to listen to of folks he played with, and it's some amazing music, yeah. And a lot of people that Amadei had influenced and played with, yeah.
Did you ever play with your cousin, James?
Yeah, not often. I played on his 2 records, maybe Chasing the Gypsy, I'm not sure. And there was a concerto written for him. I played on that record, yeah.
Since you mentioned your 13% Finnish, I'm wondering if at some point you're going to explore some of the Finnish fiddle music. I've only heard a little bit of it, but it's very different and it's very, very intricate.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I say that, I had a lot of audience members in the last month that were from Finland that said, you got to come over then and check out your people. So at some point, I think I will. I've gotten people have already started sending me information, and so who knows? I don't know if it'll be the fiddle music per se, but just there's so much interesting. They have a huge tango thing happening over there too.
Not to mention Sibelius.
Yeah, right.
Who read a pretty mean violin concerto.
Regina, when you were researching the music of those days, did you try to check with elders either in your family or in the community about their recollections, and how'd you deal with the pain of the times all these years later?
Most of them wouldn't talk about stuff.
They're still around.
Yeah, a lot. Well, my grandparents had 14 kids, and so at least 7 of them, 7 to 10, I think, are still here. And the baby of the family was the one that I got some information from, but he told me that they burned most of the documents and information and they just are so tight-lipped about it. There's information in a Bible that someone has, but they won't share it until so-and-so dies. So it's pretty difficult.
So when they came north, they left Alabama, they left the South behind, closed that book.
Yeah. And some of them were still down there. I mean, my grandmother was still there when I was growing up, so I spent my summers with her down there at her place.
So was that a connection to this work?
What do you mean?
The album that you've now done?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just based on memories, or I remember things, or certain stories that people would tell, or certain things that we did, and so trying to piece it together. But some of it was just based on information that's, little bits and pieces of information, and some of it was like, okay, this is the time period, this is what was popular, or this would have been happening here in this area, and just going from that.
I want to ask you about being a little kid growing up in Detroit, going to Alabama in the summer. And this was in the George Wallace era, if I'm not mistaken, or the end of the George. So, I mean, what kind of impression did it make on you to spend your summers in Alabama?
Well, it was really different, that's for sure. No sidewalks. We didn't have a bathroom in the house. You had to go to the outhouse. Running around with no shoes on, just getting bathed in a tin pail out front. We'd go to people's homes. We didn't. There's no phone maybe there's a telephone, I guess. When you go visit people and hear all these amazing stories, and sometimes just people playing music, so it was it was very different, but I didn't think of it then. Now that I think back, I'm like, wow, that was such a different world. But then it was just a chance to be with all my other cousins and to let loose. We could run around with our shoes off and just have at it.
And this was the family with the 12 or 14
14
children?
kids, yeah. So it's
So
like
there were a lot of cousins.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Regina, have you sat in and played with any traditional folk groups?
No, the only group that's a young, but they are traditional. I mean, they learn from the folks. I sat in with the Carolina Chocolate Drops. So, yeah. Yeah. So that was a blast.
Did you? Did you talk already about working with Young Traditions yesterday? You worked with Young Traditions yesterday, right? You did a workshop with younger violinists?
Oh, yeah, it was the age range from probably 11 on up to growner than me.
And how was that?
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we worked on the blues. And it was just fun to improvise and get them out of there. Those that were shy about it, you know, and get them out of that. And just, yeah, so it was a fun workshop.
Yep.
You mentioned the blues. I was wondering, I had heard some old blues bands from maybe the 20s, and there was often a fiddler or a violin player, and I just wondered if you had heard much of that music or
No.
were influenced by any of that.
I haven't heard much of it, no. No. Mm-mm.
Anybody who's, I keep being oh, okay, Arnie.
The first time you were here, I remember quite delightfully that you danced salsa. I thought you were fantastic.
Thank you. My past is haunting me. Someone told me that I don't know, that the band, that the woman, my percussion player, Myra, was with me then. And then she sat in and we took over some band. I don't know. But no, not dancing tonight. Sorry.
You did it on stage.
Ah, okay, right.
Anybody else? I don't want to miss anybody. Stand up if I can't see your hand. Okay. Well, let me ask you one last thing, because you talked about the workshop and the fear of improvising and getting over that. And you described how you were studying violin. You weren't improvising. How did you get comfortable with the concept after basically having a foundation where that just wasn't part of the plan?
Actually, but I'm grateful for that, because my teacher, my Suzuki teacher, didn't follow the Suzuki method per se. So she would do things on set. We had private lessons once a week, and then on Saturday you were there all day. You'd have your orchestra class or all together, and we'd have master class and all this stuff. And so we would have a chamber group too, and she would pull out Baroque pieces for us to play. And there's improvisation in those Baroque pieces, and so she would have us improvise and try it. So we were getting used to it, stylistically different, but still being used to not just to create. And then she would play this game where she would line us all up, and she would start to make up a melody, and when she tapped you on the shoulder, you had to continue making up the melody until she tapped the next person. So she kind of got us all used to that. And what's interesting about her, there were a whole group of us, and she was so incredibly mean, and we would all cry in our lessons. And she would kind of compare us to one another and make us feel like, oh, this one's better than you, and you're not this and that. And I found out as an adult that she didn't know any better. She didn't have any children. And so that was her way to try and make us work harder. And out of that group, so far that I know of, that I've met back up with, and these are kids that I grew up, we were 4 years old when we first started. 2 of them are in the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. One's in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the other in the Chicago Sinfonietta, and she's a contractor. One is a professional cellist teacher in Michigan. The other is a professional bassist. He was touring with Lion King. So there's a whole group of us that have, there are 2 that are in a quartet, Sarah and Margaret Parkins in LA. They play a lot with Billy Childs and some other people. So out of us, there are like 10 of us that have really successful careers still in music. So as mean as she was,
It worked.
something worked, yeah.
Listen, thanks very much
Thank
for
you.
sharing all this with us and for sharing the music tonight. I'm sure everyone is aware the concert's upstairs in the big hall at 8 o'clock, and it's the first of many events on the next 10 days. I think I will see you next at, and correct me if I'm wrong, 4 o'clock on Sunday, when we're going to be sitting down and talking with Benny Golson, who plays in the theater that night at 8, but there's also music here at 6 on Sunday, so we're pushing Meet the Artist a little farther back. But thanks for coming. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you.
And here's to a great festival.
Thank you.